Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Octagon Daddies. This is episode number 2. I'm Dave. He's Mike. We're here to bring you a little breakdown of UFC 284, Makhachev versus Volkanovski. First up on the card, we have a lightweight bout between Zabaria, the Warrior, Tukugov, and Elvis Brenner. Mike, you want to take this one away?
Yeah, I'll start off here. So Tukagov versus Brenner. Um, Tukagov hasn't fought since 2021. So bit of a layoff for him. He's got great wrestling and a lot of UFC experience despite the layoff. Brenner's making his UFC debut, and most of his pro fights at this point have just come in like lower tier Brazilian promotions, and he hasn't even been dominant in those. So I don't know. He's stepping in on short notice for Joel Alvarez, who happens to be a much better fighter. I just think Brenner might be in trouble here. Zubara is one of the biggest favorites on the cards, and deservedly so. I think he's going to win this one. Everybody thinks, or not thinks, but I would say everybody is really anticipating him just kind of dominating with his wrestling. And I can certainly see that, but I actually think he's going to land. He loves to throw some like big, powerful right hands with his wrestling. So I actually think he's going to score a TKO to take this one.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely get behind that one. I do have noted here he's a pretty low volume guy. Like you said, he throws a lot of big right hands. He's never been taken down in the UFC to Kugov. Um, Same thing with Brenner. Uh, My only fear is if this does go to the ground, his BJJ might be able to take over a little bit. He does have 10 finishes by submission, 7 of them being an armbar. 8 of them have come in the first round alone. I think if he has a chance, it's going to be really early. But I'm going to go with you on this one. I like Takugov by TKO. If I were a betting man, I'd probably just take the money line and throw it in with a parlay.
I thought you were for a second. I thought you were maybe making a case for Brenner and was going to pick him, but no.
No, that's a big dog. As much as I like to bet the dogs, I don't think that's a good one on this fight.
Agreed.
All right, so up next we got a featherweight bout between Shane Smokin' Young and Blake El Animal Builder. On this one, I am leaning very strongly towards the underdog Blake Builder. The kid's coming off of some contender series wins, specifically by a rear naked choke. 5 of his 7 victories, he is 7-0-1, have been by stoppage. 4 of those 5 stoppages are submissions. He's a pretty good striker, but he completely excels when he gets the fight to the ground. As for Young, he is a high volume guy. He takes a lot of punches as well. And he's very susceptible to takedowns. I think if Builder can get this one on the ground, he will submit Young, and it'll probably happen pretty quickly. As for Young, I don't have much to say about him. I don't think, should probably even be in the UFC at this point. He was 2-3 over his career so far. He did lose to Volkanovski back in 2017, so he's been around a while. His last fight was a loss to Omar Morales, if that speaks to anything. I don't think he has a chance, even though he is a pretty solid favorite going into this one.
Yeah, I think this one's more interesting than it appears on paper. Shane Young, like you said, he's a veteran. He's been around for several years. He has that, I guess you could say, really good loss against Volkanovski about 5 years ago. Builder's coming in off a win on the Contender Series. He's undefeated as a pro. Granted, his competition has been mediocre at best.
Pretty low level.
Yeah, so obviously Young has a big experience edge here. Young's a really aggressive fighter, but actually what I think is going to happen is he's going to be, I think, over eager. I think he's going to put himself in a bad spot against Builder. And Builder, he's got solid skills both in stand up and grappling. I think he can get it done in a lot of different ways. I think he's very confident both in stand up and on the ground. So I'm with you. I'm going to take Builder, who's a slight dog in this one.
Nice. It's not usual that we're on the same side of these.
It's not a good sign, I guess. I don't know. Strange,
Yeah.
right?
So everybody else go bet young right now.
Apparently.
All right. So coming up next, we have a women's strawweight bout. It's Loma Lukbunmi and Elise Reed. On this one, Mike, why don't you give it a go?
Yeah, so both of these fighters have been pretty inconsistent. If you look at their records, one thing about Reed is she's often commended for her intangibles more than anything. Like she's really tough and
Yep.
resilient. That's nice, but I feel like when you're getting a lot of compliments for like intangible stuff, it probably means that your skills aren't that great. And I think that's the case here, unfortunately for her.
Yep.
I don't think the intangibles are going to be enough for her to win this fight. Loma has been inconsistent, but I think she is definitely the better fighter all around, particularly in the stand-up game. Um, I see this one going to a decision. And
Yep.
I think Loma will just have a little bit more output, quite frankly. I don't think it'll be a dominating effort, but just a kind of a solid decision win.
Yeah, I'm with you completely on that. I have Loma winning this one by decision. I also have it going over 2.5 rounds. I think that's a solid single game parlay that you could throw together on DraftKings. It'll get you to right around like minus 150 instead of betting this at uh, a minus 285 and a minus 305 for the over 2.5. Um, I do love Look Boomy is definitely a much more higher volume striker compared to Reed. Um, to me, Reed doesn't really impress me much. She did beat Melissa Martinez in her last win, but outside of that, she has not been very impressive in her UFC career. I think, like you said, Luke Boomy is going to be a little bit more active in this one. I expect them both to hit each other fairly well, and I could see both of them probably landing somewhere in the 50 to 65 strike range throughout the entire fight. I just think the pace that Loma is going to put on will definitely drive her to win the decision.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, and coming up next, we have a featherweight bout with Jack Farr Jenkins and Don Shameless Shanias. On this one, I will take it away. Um, I really like Jenkins. Think the kid has a lot to prove. He's coming off a contender series win. Um, of his 10-2 record, 8 of them are by stoppages. He's on a 7 fight win streak. He's got a little bit of a reach advantage on this one. He's a good striker. He's got great stand-up defense. He doesn't take a lot of punches. Whereas Shannis himself um, tends to not last very long, at least since he's been in the UFC. And he's only had the one bout um, that he lost to Sadiq Youssef, but it was in the first 30 seconds of the fight to a guillotine. He took a lot of strikes. It was something like 25 significant strikes in the first 30 seconds of that fight. That's not going to do anything for him in this fight against Jenkins. He will get beat to the ground. Um, so yeah, on this one, I do think Jenkins is going to pull it out. I'm not confident in saying he's going to get the finish. If I were to put money on it, I'd probably take the money line at minus 345 and throw it in with a parlay.
Yeah, I see this one going very similarly to you. Like you said, Jenkins, contender series alum, unbeaten streak going back to 2018. Um, you know, yeah, sure, it was a short notice fight that Shayna's had against Yusuf, but like you said, it lasted like seconds and he was just obliterated. So he's got a full camp this time, but I'm not sold. There's no reason to be sold. Both of these guys have T-Rex arms, so there's not going to be any reach advantage with these guys. Jenkins is a bit of a bulldog, though. He likes to mix in the takedowns as well. He's very physical. So I've
Yeah.
got the Aussie. I got Jenkins riding that home canvas advantage for the win here.
All right. And up next, we have a next is a flyweight fight. I had it written down as a heavyweight fight, and I don't know why. Next is a flyweight fight from Clayton Rodriguez and Shannon, the Turkish Delight Ross. Mike, if you want to go ahead and jump in on this one and take it away.
Yeah, so there's a bit of an interesting backstory on this one. I don't know if you read up on this or remember it, but Ross was on the Contender Series and he got
Was.
knocked out, but it was like a banger of a fight. It was just back and forth. It was just really impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Ross didn't get a contract that night, but the next day he had like a terrible pain in his midsection, and he went to the hospital. Apparently, he had appendicitis and had like emergency surgery.
Wow.
And this was enough apparently to impress Dana White to the point where he eventually offered him a contract.
Okay.
Um, so really kind of interesting story for Ross there.
Tough as nails.
Yeah, like Rodriguez, on the other hand, he lost his first and only UFC fight last year in a pretty close
Yeah.
decision. Um, I here's the thing. What it comes down to for me is I love that Ross goes in there and goes absolutely nuts and throws caution to the wind. I think he might land 8 significant strikes a minute, but he'll like take 8 a minute as well.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's going to be a recipe for success here. So I think Rodriguez is going to like survive the onslaught, and he's going to win this over a tired Ross, I think.
I actually agree with you completely. The Rodriguez fight on uh in his UFC debut, all the stats, everything shows that he was clearly ahead on the scorecards. That was one of those we have no idea what the judges were thinking type of things. I think he should be 1-0 in the UFC. He was on a 7 fight win streak before that. Um, I think he's a lot like Ross in that he jumps out and he tries to overwhelm people. I think it's going to be a banger. I could see this one being a fight of the night candidate to get that fight of the night bonus. I think these two guys are going to pound on each other for 3 rounds. It's going to go to a decision. I expect them both to be bloody, beaten to a pulp, but I think Rodriguez comes out on top.
All right.
All right, up next, we get into what might be one of the best fights on the card. Featherweight bout with Joshua Kulibau and Melsik the Gun Bagdasarian. On this one, I am leaning towards Bagdasarian, and I don't know why. I haven't been able to talk myself off of the ledge. He's a high volume striker. He throws a lot of kicks. He gets a lot of he's got multiple knockouts with his kicks, or at least multiple TKOs that have come from these kicks. He hasn't fought since November of 2020, so he's got a little over a 2-year layoff. I think he's going to come out determined. He is 2-0 in the UFC, whereas Kulibau is 2-1-1 in the UFC. He did lose to Jalen Turner. I mean, he's no slouch. He had a split draw with Charles Jourdain. Again, another slouch. He holds his own. He did beat the Korean Zombie as well, which is pretty impressive. He's got a decent resume. I am just leaning towards the Armenian, Bagdasarian. I think he has enough power to go along with being a little bit shorter, that he can work it from in the clinch, do a little dirty boxing, maybe throw a couple knees, land one solid kick that Kulibau's not looking for, and it gets to the ground. And I think he will end up taking this by points. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a great matchup, and I really for a while kind of struggled with this one. Kulabau, he's looked pretty good. He's a pretty hyped prospect, like you mentioned, 2 fight win streak. That only loss coming to Jalen Turner, who he's inconsistent, but Turner can really fight with anybody in the UFC.
Mm-hmm.
Bagdasarian, like you said, he hasn't fought for a couple years, but he is 2-0 in the UFC. I'm not one that usually gives a lot of credence to ring rust, so I'm not really going to factor in that when I'm making a decision here. Here's what it comes down to for me. Bagdasaryan, his stand-up game is beautiful. I mean, you just watch him,
Yeah.
you're like, wow, that guy's like pretty striking, if that's a thing.
He's silky smooth.
He is. And so I think he does have more tools in the stand-up game. And I think both guys are going to look to strike here. I just think the gun is better equipped for that kind of fight. So I'm with you. Bagdasaryan outpoints Kulabau.
All right. And up next, we have a light heavyweight bout with Tyson Pedro and Modestus Bukauskas. Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so both of these guys have some decent experience in the UFC, especially Pedro. Bukowskis was actually in the UFC for a while, lost a few fights, got cut,
Yeah. Cage
and then
Warriors.
bounced back with a couple Cage Warriors victories. And here
Mhm.
he is now getting a second chance. Pedro, at times he's looked like a world beater. He's looked really good. You're like, this guy's poised to jump into the rankings. And then other times he's looked average at best, and you're like, you're left frustrated, just like wondering what happened, why he
Yeah.
left so much out there. That being said, I am going to take Pedro. I worry a little bit about his gas tank, maybe. But ultimately, Bukaskas doesn't defend that well. And what I like about Pedro is like he works the entire body with his striking, right? So
He does.
he'll go for up high, body shots. He'll go with the kicks. So
Yeah.
I like that. And ultimately, he has a decent submission game as well. Pretty opportunistic. I wouldn't say he's like a dominant jiu-jitsu artist, but he's pretty
Yeah.
formidable, I guess. So I'm gonna go with Pedro.
All right. It's another one that we're agreeing on. Did want to ask you, I know you were talking about Pedro's gas tank. What do you think about Bukauskas' gas tank? He fought in November and December of 2022.
I know, and that I don't
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that kind of speaks pretty well for his resiliency, kind of how he believes in himself. And mainly when fighters are doing that, when they're fighting like 1, 2, or even 3 months apart, that tells me that they're not like Paddy Pimblett, who like blows up when they're not fighting and they become like a giant fat balloon.
Yeah.
But Koskas is a guy I think who just like consistently stays in almost like camp form. So I
Okay.
don't know. I think he's got that going for him. Pedro, I'm not so sure he's that type of guy. But Koskas, I think he might have the edge there.
Okay. I am on the Pedro train. I think he wins this by TKO. I think there might be a little bit of a gas tank issue for Bukauskas just because this will be his third fight in 3 months. Um, that's really the only thing I have that is against Bukauskas. He is a volume striker. It's a little bit lower than what I'd like to see. His biggest thing, like you did mention, is his defense. If he can't stop the leg kicks, he can't win. If I'm not mistaken, he was one of the guys that has had a stoppage in the UFC via leg kicks. I may be confused with somebody else. Um, but there was a period where when they were kind of in the bubble in the apex, there were a bunch of guys that were losing by leg kicks, and I think Bukauskas might have been one of the first. Um, and my hope is that Pedro kind of plays in that, like kind of rolls that into his game plan, and he throws a lot of lower leg kicks. He does like to spread it around a lot. I think if he chops the tree in this one, he will probably end up getting a TKO. He should be able to damage those legs enough that he gets Bukauskas down onto the ground and he can work some ground and pound and get a stoppage.
All right. I don't know if we've differed on any picks so far. But I'll take it. I'll take it.
No, not yet. We're kind of in line with each other. This is a little odd.
Yeah.
All right. Coming up next, we have a light heavyweight battle. We have Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Atomic Mayfield. So I'll jump into this one. I am riding Alonzo's train on this one. He's 13-3 overall, 6-3 in the UFC. He got 2-fight win streak. Both of them are TKOs. His last loss was to William Knight. I mean, William Knight's no slouch. He can throw with anybody if he gets lucky and lands a solid cross. he can knock anybody out. Um, Manayfield's a little bit lower volume of a guy, but he's got big power. My thing with him is his gas tank. If it gets out of the second round, is he going to survive? And that would be where I think he probably gets the stoppage. I would hope it'd be sometime in the second round. Crute is on a 2-fight losing streak to Jamal Hill and Anthony Smith, both by TKO. He's an average striker. He's got 3 finishes. He is actually one that lost by a leg kick stoppage to Jamal Hill. I knew it was somebody right in this range. Thought I wrote it down. I did. It's right here. He was one of the leg kick stoppages back in the Apex about a year and a half ago. He has never gone the distance, Crute, in the UFC. He either gets somebody out or gets knocked out. There is no in between. And I think Manayfield has that power to knock him out.
Okay. First of all, did you turn Jimmy Crute into a Frenchman?
Crute, I did.
Okay.
I like did. It's been a long day.
Yeah. That's okay. Add a little spice to it. Yeah, this is one of those fights where like nobody's expecting it to go the distance, but it's somehow it will. I'm not saying it will, but it's like one of those weird ones, I feel like maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to bet on that, but it happens a lot. But anyway, like you said, Crute's coming off a couple losses. They're both great fighters, though. Jamal Hill, Anthony Smith.
Oh, yeah.
Menafield is terrifying, right? He's absolute powerhouse in there. When picking this fight, though, I think I kind of had to try to keep it as simple as possible. And I just think Crute is a much better mixed martial artist all around. So nobody will be at all be surprised, if Menafield wins by knockout. Nobody will be surprised by that. But ultimately, I got to make a pick. So I'm going to go with Crute here.
Ooh. All right. Well, and then up next after this one, we have a heavyweight fight in Justin Tafa and Parker Porter. On this one, Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't like either of these guys. Not really interested in this fight. Tafa hasn't fought since like 2021. I think he missed weight in that bout, which, come on, man, you're a heavyweight. And he ended up knocking out. Yeah, he ended up knocking out Harry Hunsucker. Tafa managed. Here's the thing, right? I don't know how the hell this happened, but Tafa somehow managed to lose to Jared Vandera, who's horrible, absolutely horrible. Yeah. Porter, he's had the bad fortune to be matched up in his last fight with Geraldton Almeida. So I don't count that loss against him in the sense that Almeida's an absolute savage. Yeah. And before that fight, he was actually on a 3-fight winning streak.
He was.
I think Parker is slightly more durable. I don't really trust anything about Tafa, so I'm going to go with Parker.
Okay, that's a little bit of a surprise. I thought you were going to go with Tafa on that one. I'm actually on Parker as this one as well. I think he wins it by a decision. It ends up going to points. What surprised me is his loss to Alameda. That fight lasted 4 minutes and 35 seconds. He didn't land a single punch. He didn't throw a single punch or kick. It was absolute domination. I don't think I've ever seen that happen in all my time watching the UFC. Porter's a good striker, though. He's got a little bit of power. He's never knocked anybody out in the UFC. All 3 of his wins are by decision. He's got decent stamina. He lands a good amount of significant strikes per minute, just about 6.5. He takes just about 6.5 per minute as well. So he's either getting beat up or he beats somebody up. It's usually a pretty. He plays Rock'em Sock'em Robots is the best way to put it when he gets in the ring or in the octagon. Tafa, on the other hand, he's pretty similar. He's at 5.62 for thrown significant strikes per minute landed, and he takes about 5.9. So I think these 2 guys are just going to get in there, throw their hands. Neither of them like to get on the ground. They're both prone to being submitted if it really does happen. Um, I do think that if it does go the distance, Porter is definitely the guy that's going to win this one.
All right. Well, I commend you for having so much to say about this uninspiring fight. So
I
well
tried
done.
to. We had to fill the silence with something. We could
I
have just
like it.
sat here and smiled, and that's
Would
it
have
would have
been would have
been.
been more entertaining than this fight potentially.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
All right, and up next we have a welterweight battle between Randy Rude Boy Brown and Jack Della Maddalena. On this one, I'll jump right in. I think Maddalena is going to win this, and it's not going to be close. I don't think it gets past the midway point of the first round. He's fighting at home. He's going to have the crowd going crazy. He's the last fight before the co-main and the main. That arena is going to be ready to erupt, and I think he's the guy that gets it done. He is 3-0 in the UFC, all by knockout. He's 13-2 overall. He's on a 13-fight win streak. Only one of his fights has gone the distance. 11 of the 13 wins are TKOs. One was a submission. He's an above average striker. He's throwing around 8.5 strikes per minute, significant strikes, landing significant strikes per minute. And he's got solid stand-up defense. He only gets hit about 40% of the time, which is pretty low for the UFC. Brown, on the other hand, he's a veteran. He's 10-4 in the UFC. He's on a 4-fight win streak. 3 of them were by decision. He had a notable loss though, a couple years back to Nico Price. And it was kind of all over the place. Price was on his back, hit him with some hammer fists, with Randy Brown trying to rain down on some ground and pound, and he got knocked out cold. He's really not a TKO threat, a KO threat at all. I think Maddalena is clearly the better fighter in this one, and he gets it done quickly.
Okay. Well, first of all, I understand the hype for Maddalena. I don't think Brown is getting enough respect here. So like you said, Rude Boy, 10-4 in the UFC. He's got 10 UFC wins. Yeah, he's lost 4, but how many people have 10 UFC wins? I've never looked that up, but that's a pretty big number.
Yeah.
Brown, he fights really intelligently because, like you said, he doesn't have a tremendous amount of power. He's technically sound. Look, I'm definitely concerned, or would be concerned, that Maddalena can put him to sleep at any moment. Very, very good possibility. Brown's been knocked out before, like you said, by Luque and Price, so there's precedent there. That being said, give me Brown in the
Ooh.
upset of the night.
Ooh.
Okay. I think his experience, his fight IQ, and here's the thing. Here's my biggest key to this. He finishes fights really strongly. He knows how to fight. He knows how to conserve just enough so he can finish well in the third round. So I'm still high on Della Maddalena, even though his name sounds like a Lady Gaga song. But I really think the hype train is going to come to a little bit of a halt, and I think Brown's going to pull off the upset.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Now we get into the first of our 2 championship fights of the night. We have our co-main event. It's a featherweight fight featuring Yair El Pantera Rodriguez and Josh Emmett. On this one, Mike, what do you got?
Yeah, I think until yesterday, I completely forgot this was an interim featherweight title fight. So
It
that's interesting.
is.
So theoretically, the winner of this could
It's the
or
fight
would
Volk.
fight Volk next. Yeah. All right. Well, this one I'm really, really excited about. I mean, there's few fighters that are as entertaining as Yair Rodriguez.
Yes.
I mean, you can speak to his dynamic striking and creativeness all day. It's awesome to watch. So that being said, I'll focus on some of the negative with Rodriguez. So not that you should really you take a lot negatively away from a loss to Max Holloway because it's Max Holloway. He was pretty thoroughly beaten in that one, though. Um,
He was.
Also, everybody remembers that ridiculous last second. I think it was like, I don't even know if it was a spinning back elbow or some sort of elbow that knocked down Korean Zombie, like in
I
the
was,
last second of that fight.
I was there that night. That was in Denver.
That's incredible. I think that was one of my kids were being born. That's why I missed it.
It was.
Yeah. And the thing is, we'll never know. But I honestly, in watching the fight back, I think Korean Zombie was winning the fight
Oh, he
potentially.
was. He
He
was.
was okay. So there you go. Um, so Yair is like one of these guys that like he's been pegged as the next champion and all these things, and he just hasn't quite fulfilled that yet. Um, so we'll see. I mean, Josh Emmett. Um, the thing about Josh Emmett is he's just kind of a guy that goes out there and quietly does his thing, gets his wins. Not usually too spectacular. I think he's like 18-2 though, some ridiculous record.
Yeah.
Um,
I look at him like a pit bull almost.
yeah, yeah. He does have that strength and power advantage here, no question about that. So his path to victory, I think, would be like getting inside Rodriguez, trying to
Hmm.
land one of those vicious hooks that he likes to
Yep.
throw, but like trying to mix in some like clinching and maybe control time against the cage to throw Rodriguez off. I think that's probably his best bet. Um, I think it's gonna ultimately, I do think it's gonna stay a stand-up battle. And if it
Yeah.
goes that way, I'm gonna pick Rodriguez. I'm gonna have Rodriguez winning this, taking home the interim featherweight title.
Okay. And this is one where we are differing. I am actually on Emmett on this one. I think Rodriguez is nothing but a hype train. And that's just after it's nothing against him. He's flashy. He is flashy. He gets finishes. I don't think he would have been here if T City didn't hurt his shoulder. He was getting dominated in that fight. He wouldn't be here. This would be an Ortega Emmett fight for this belt. I think he's here by default on an injury. Not, and that's not to take anything away from him. He's flashy. He's got a great chin. He can throw punches with anybody. He did not look bad against Holloway, but Holloway makes great people look bad sometimes. Um, he throws a lot of punches. He takes just about the same. Whereas Emmett is kind of along the same lines. He has an impressive 5 fight win streak going on. Michael Johnson, Bektik, Burgos, Ige, and Qatar. Um, for the featherweight division, that's murderer's row. There's not a lot of strong fighters floating around, and he's beaten the best. Um, Emma's got a great chin. He's got amazing stamina. He's got he's got KO power. He can knock somebody out. And I think that's what it's going to come down to, like you said, grinding up against the octagon cage and a little bit of dirty boxing, coming out of those clinches and throwing an elbow or throwing that hook. I think if he lands one or two of them, we start to see Rodriguez kind of try to avoid him a little bit more and run. And at some point, he's going to run right into that hand. I I do think this one though does end up going to a decision. I don't think Yair's going to get knocked out. Um, I like Emmett by decision at plus 300. I think that's a phenomenal number. I don't see him getting knocked out. I don't see Yair getting knocked out. I think betting on the decision at that number is well worth it.
Okay, well, it took a while, but we're finally swinging in opposite directions here as we end the card.
We are, and this is generally where we start to swing in opposite directions on the big fights.
It's true.
But now for the biggest fight of the night. We have our lightweight championship bout. Champ versus champ. Islam Makhachev versus Alexander the Great Volkanovski. I have struggled with this one for a month, thinking who could potentially win it, and it's flip flopped every single day. I can see both guys. I can see a path to victory for both of them. Sitting down, taking my notes, it kind of started to solidify a little bit more in who I like on this one. But before I get into that, I do want to just break down Makhachev a little bit. He is 12-1 in the UFC. That one loss was a long, long, long time ago. 2015 was a KO. He got caught with a very solid right hand that probably would have knocked anybody else out. It wasn't, it had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with he got hit with the perfect punch in that fight. He hasn't had to show much as a striker since he's been in the UFC. Yeah, he lands some really solid punches. But as soon as he has somebody even remotely wobbled, he takes them to the ground and grinds them to death. And it happens every single fight. He does have some pretty good stamina, but he's never seen a fifth round. And I think that could be a problem for him in this fight. I hate going against the Dagestanis. These guys are machines. And I don't doubt that if this were to hit the fifth round, he would be just as fresh as he was in the first or the second. But it scares me a little bit after seeing Volkanovski and what he can do against guys that literally just overwhelm everybody. Max Holloway, for one. He beat Max Holloway at his own game. Nobody beats Max Holloway at their own game. As for Volkanovski, he's 12-0 in the UFC. He's got a 22 fight win streak. Absolutely insane. Like, that's unheard of. He is a machine. He's got unmatched stamina. I don't think there's anybody in the UFC that can probably go toe to toe with him at the pace he keeps up, except for Holloway. He throws just about twice the number of significant strikes landing them per minute than his opponents. He's not a big KO guy, not big and powerful. It's usually by overwhelming the opponent. But I think the biggest thing for me coming into this fight, thinking about it, is how impressive it was that he survived Ortega's guillotine when he flopped around like a dead fish. And purple face, blue face, he was every color of the rainbow at one point. And he walked away and won the fight. His toughness, I think, is a lot more apparent than anything that Makhachev has seen in the UFC. And I think it's going to weigh heavily in Volkanovski's favor. I do think he wins this fight, Volkanovski. I actually think it's going to be by decision. He will probably be in trouble somewhere in the second or third round and wait his way out, kind of bide his time. If he can get out of the round where he ends up on his back, I don't think he'll get taken down again. He usually is pretty good about avoiding it for a second time. And I think he uses that insane reach that he has, and he points Makhachev.
All right. I know how big of a Volk fanboy you are, so I'm not surprised by that pick. Yeah. Well, here's, and I like Volkanovski too, but I think, like, as kind of the week's gone on and I'm looking at the betting odds and I see Islam like a minus 400 favorite, that kind of like offends me, honestly.
There's
Like,
no.
It's absolutely ridiculous that he's minus 400. And there's so many things that people are going to point to. I think one of the first ones is like, well, Volkanovski, featherweight, he's moving up to lightweight. Volkanovski might not be as tall, but he's naturally a much bigger guy than Makhachev is. He is stout. So I don't think that's going to be a factor at all. Here's what's interesting, right? So, like, with Volkanovski, He's got good takedown defense. I wouldn't say it's great. It's good. He got taken down a couple times by Ortega, like you
Mhm.
mentioned. He survived a submission attempt. So yeah, I think Islam can take him down and will probably take him down. But here's how I kind of see the fight playing out. So Islam has made some comments kind of leading up to this fight, and even at his last several fights, honestly, about him wanting to prove that he can strike and he's a good striker. And
Mhm.
I think he's got this chip on his shoulder, um, just about that. And actually, what I think is going to happen, he's going to be looking to prove that he can strike with Volk. And one thing about Volk is, as good of a striker as he is, and he's outstanding, his stand-up defense actually isn't that good. He gets popped quite a bit. He's got a good
Yes.
chin though. Like Holloway lit him up quite a bit in a few of those
Mhm.
fights. Well, not the last one, but the first two. Um, so I think Islam is what he's going to do is he's going to find some success with the striking, but it's not going to be enough. And I think Volkanovski is going to get the better of him, even though Islam's going to land some strikes. I think what's going to happen is Islam won't attempt and land as many takedowns as he should because of that. I think Volkanovski is intelligent. I think he's crafty. I think he's tough. Obviously has a great gas tank. I think he's going to win. I honestly think Volkanovski is the better fighter. I love Islam. He is one of my favorite fighters. Um, Islam, I think, is unfortunately getting a little bit too much credit for being Khabib's protege. He is certainly Khabib's protege,
Yeah.
and he's the closest thing to Khabib, but he's not Khabib. He's not quite as dominant with the wrestling. He's great. He's the best that there is in the UFC, but he's not quite Khabib level. And I think he's getting a little bit too much of people that are like, oh, this is just Khabib 2.0. And I don't think he is as great as he is. So I'm going to agree with you, which is kind of rare for a main, and I'm going to pick Volkanovski here by decision.
Ooh. All right. Oh yeah, it's very rare that we usually agree on a main event of a big championship fight. I I don't know, and like you said, I am a Volk fanboy. I have been for a long time. I was all over him that night that he beat Max the first time, and I was probably one of five people in the arena that was all over him.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. That was a really good point about Makhachev. And he does keep talking about, I need to show everyone that I am a good striker. And that might be his downfall this time around. That's a really good point. I didn't think of that. All right. Well, I think that just about covers it for this card. I know we did make some picks last week, and neither of us, due to the timing of the card and having families, was able to stay up and watch it. We did catch a couple of replays, um, but overall, last week, we did want to break down how we did on our picks. My parlay did not pan out. Saragi losing that fight was the downfall for it. But I did go 8-2 overall with that one draw. Mike, how'd you do?
I did not do well. Thanks for asking. I went 5-5. My bet, which I didn't really place much on, did not win. I had a parlay. Main thing is I was very confident in Kinoshita winning. He lost to Fugit, which you picked. So
I
credit to
did.
you for that. That killed my parlay. But I went 5-5 last week, so feel better about this week going into it here. Uh, so yeah, any best bets? I think you mentioned maybe one earlier, but any best bets as we close it out?
Yeah, just my only best bet of the night was Madalena by TKO. And I did have a three-fight parlay that I threw together to get us to plus 341, and that's Madalena TKO, Pedro Moneyline, and Yair Emmett going over 4.5. That will get you up to plus 341. It's a decent line for what I think is a good set of picks. Obviously, I know you're on the other end on the Madalena fight. Do you have anything that you would recommend potentially?
I don't really have a ton that I love, except for honestly, just the plain old money line bet on Volkanovski. I looked at Volkanovski by decision, but because that's his path to victory is so likely to be a decision,
Yeah.
it's not really any much extra money to pick him by decision. So rather have like a wider net and take Volkanovski just on the money line. I think depending on where you look, it's anywhere from like plus 280 to plus 380 in some places. So you get significant value on that. So that's really my best bet of the night.
Awesome. Awesome. I did get it at plus 310 yesterday. I jumped on it when I saw it was over 300. It was hard to pass up. All right. Well, I think that wraps it up for tonight and our breakdown of UFC 284. Join us again next week as we go over some of the picks that we made this week and make some more projections and breakdowns for Tyler Santos and Aaron Blanchfield. All right, everybody. Y'all have a good night.
Thanks for watching, guys.